Welcome to the WorldWire Update. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for more updates and thrilling short scenes. On September 4, 2025, what began as a routine law enforcement action at the Hyundai LG electric vehicle battery plant in rural Georgia unexpectedly erupted into an international crisis that would dominate headlines for weeks. The world watched as a seemingly ordinary day at a construction site spiraled into a diplomatic and economic firestorm, the consequences of which would be felt far beyond the state's borders. Federal agents from Homeland Security, acting on intelligence, stormed the sprawling construction site. What was intended as a targeted operation quickly escalated, transforming into the largest single-site enforcement action in the agency's history. The scale and intensity of the raid caught everyone off guard. Workers, management, and even local officials. The raid, which was supposed to focus on just a handful of workers, instead sent shockwaves from Georgia all the way to Seoul. News of the operation spread rapidly, threatening billions in investment and shaking the very foundation of the US-South Korea alliance. The sense of uncertainty was palpable, as both nations scrambled to assess the fallout. The Hyundai Meta plant was more than just a factory. It was a $26 billion symbol of President Trump's economic agenda, a testament to the promise of foreign capital creating American jobs and revitalizing local economies. Its success was meant to showcase the benefits of international cooperation, but the chaos unleashed by the raid left America's allies questioning its reliability as a partner. The timing could not have been worse, coming amid tense trade negotiations and the threat of new tariffs. Diplomats and business leaders alike wondered if years of trust and collaboration were suddenly at risk. The incident exposed a deep contradiction at the heart of U.S. policy. The nation's need for foreign investment and expertise clashing with aggressive domestic enforcement. This tension risked undermining the very goals that projects like the Meta plant were meant to achieve, leaving investors and workers alike in a state of uncertainty. What happened that day was no longer just about immigration enforcement. It became a question of trust, economic stability, and the future of a critical alliance. The world watched as the relationship between two longtime partners was put to the test. The events in Georgia set off a chain reaction that neither country could easily control, sending ripples through global markets, diplomatic circles, and the very fabric of international cooperation. The raid's initial target was just 4 workers, but it quickly escalated into a mass roundup of hundreds. Most detained were not undocumented laborers, but highly skilled South Korean engineers and technicians, essential for installing advanced EV battery equipment. Between 316 and 475 workers were detained, many on technical visa issues, not criminal charges. Reports of zip-tied professionals and crowded holding cells sparked outrage in South Korea, where these experts were seen as partners, not criminals. The abrupt deportation of these workers left a massive skills gap, halting critical installation work and jeopardizing the plant's future. The human and economic costs were immediate: disrupted lives, anxious families, and a multi-billion-dollar project suddenly at risk. The raid's fallout was just beginning to be felt on both sides of the Pacific. The fallout in Seoul was immediate: shock, outrage, and a sense of betrayal. President Lee Jae-myung's government condemned the raid, especially after a recent White House visit meant to reaffirm the alliance. South Korean media broadcast images of detained professionals, fueling public anger and demands for answers. Business leaders, having pledged billions in U.S. investments, now questioned the safety and predictability of operating in America. The message was clear: if top engineers could be detained and deported without warning, no investment was safe. The Trump administration found itself caught between its America First policies and the risk of alienating a key ally. South Korea demanded explanations, apologies, and guarantees, setting the stage for tense negotiations to salvage the partnership. The alliance was suddenly on the brink. Hyundai had spent years courting the Trump administration, donating to inauguration festivities and making strategic alliances with key political figures. They pledged a staggering $26 billion in U.S. investments, aiming to solidify their presence in the American market. The Georgia Meta plant was the crown jewel of this initiative, meant to create thousands of jobs and stimulate the local economy. This plant was designed to anchor America in the global EV supply chain, making it a pivotal part of Hyundai's strategy. Hyundai's strategy was clear: become a major domestic employer to earn goodwill and protection from tariffs. They aimed to integrate deeply into the American economy, hoping this would shield them from any adverse policies. Despite these efforts, the Trump administration imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on auto imports in April 2025, with no exceptions for South Korea, leaving Hyundai in a precarious position. Billions in investment and a public relations blitz weren't enough to shield Hyundai from America's protectionist turn. The lesson was harsh. In the world of America first, even the biggest bets could be upended overnight. The sudden imposition of tariffs meant that Hyundai's ambitious plans were now in jeopardy. The stage was set for the September crisis, a period of intense uncertainty and strategic re-evaluation. Hyundai's American dream was suddenly in jeopardy, casting a shadow over their future in the U.S. market. The raid was the dramatic climax of months of bruising, high-stakes trade talks between the U.S. and South Korea. Tensions had been simmering for weeks, with both sides locked in a standoff that seemed to have no easy resolution. Behind closed doors, negotiators struggled to find common ground, as the world watched anxiously. The Trump administration threatened a sweeping 25% tariff on all Korean goods entering the U.S., a move that would have devastated South Korea's export-driven economy. In a tense compromise, the White House agreed to lower the tariff to 15%, but only in exchange for a staggering investment package from Seoul, one that would reshape the economic relationship between the two countries. South Korea reluctantly agreed to funnel over $500 billion into the U.S. economy, a sum that would strain its own financial system. But when Washington demanded massive upfront cash payments, an impossible ask that risked triggering a currency crisis, Korean officials balked. The pressure was immense, and the stakes could not have been higher. U.S. officials boasted that most profits from the deal would flow directly to American companies and workers, fueling resentment and anger in Seoul. South Korean lawmakers and citizens alike began to question the value of the alliance, with some calling for the government to withdraw its investment pledges altogether. When news broke of the Georgia raid, many in South Korea saw it as a calculated act of intimidation, a warning shot from Washington, not a mere coincidence. The sense of betrayal ran deep, and trust between the two allies was eroding fast. President Lee, facing mounting outrage at home and intense scrutiny from the media, began to consider accepting the original 25% tariff rather than submit to further humiliation. The political cost of continued concessions was becoming unbearable. The alliance, once seen as unbreakable, was now pushed to its breaking point. Years of trust and cooperation were suddenly in jeopardy. For South Korea, the cost of partnership with America had never seemed higher or more uncertain. The future of the alliance now hung in the balance. As the crisis deepened, the Trump administration scrambled to contain the fallout. President Trump posted conciliatory messages, and the State Department dispatched envoys to Seoul to express regret, without admitting wrongdoing. Talks focused on fixing the visa system, with both sides agreeing to new flexibilities for Korean workers and proposing a dedicated E-4 visa category. A bipartisan bill in Congress aimed to create 15,000 new professional visas for South Koreans, acknowledging the need for a stable, legal pathway. Despite these gestures, trust was badly shaken. South Korea pressed for permanent guarantees to protect its investments and people from future crackdowns. The cleanup had begun, but the damage was done. For Seoul, the incident exposed a vulnerability and a need for a new path forward. The Georgia raid forced South Korea to rethink its dependence on the U.S. Seoul accelerated efforts to diversify trade and defense, expanding exports to Southeast Asia and the EU in the wake of the crisis. The message was clear: South Korea would not rely solely on an unpredictable partner. On defense, President Lee began calling for a more self-reliant military, reducing dependence on U.S. forces. The alliance was not over, but it was fundamentally changing, becoming more transactional and less dependent. South Korea's pivot marked a new era, building a network of global partnerships for greater autonomy and security. The long-term consequence of the Georgia raid was not collapse, but transformation. The U.S.-South Korea relationship would never be the same.